Let's see. Is it recording? All right, we are recording.
The screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
All right, well, welcome to week 2. Thanks everybody for joining. Good to see everybody and see names of people I can't see faces. So week 2, we're going to talk about spending priorities. Next week, we'll talk about debt, then giving. But today we'll talk about spending priorities. Actually, sometimes when I do this, I like to start with giving because I think that kind of sets the stage, but we'll hold off on giving for a couple more weeks. So today we'll do a quick recap. We'll talk about our part in the stewardship. Week 1, we talked about the concept of stewardship, and we'll talk about our part being a faithful steward, and then pursuing faith in our finances, and then actually talk about the spending priorities. Like I said before, we're talking principles, not techniques. So we'll get into some practicality near the end, but first kind of set the stage with some principles. So I talked last week about who has influenced me. I didn't give Larry Burkett much airtime. I just want to go back to Larry. He really was the pioneer in a ministry specifically towards teaching biblical principles of managing money. He really was the pioneer, not only in the ministry, but in the radio ministry too, before Dave Ramsey's show and many other shows. Larry Burkett had a show, nationwide show that was very popular. And Larry was a very wise man and very gentle man. And I think he was an engineer, so he wasn't quite as flamboyant and entertaining maybe as Dave Ramsey, but very wise. Here's what his kind of secret of financial freedom was. The steps that he laid out that I think are still good wisdom. But one was to develop a plan, a written plan or a budget, and focus on essentials. Focus on what's most important. We'll talk about priorities today, but especially if you're in debt, focus on essentials. Think before you buy. One of the things he would say is, if you have something, commit to getting more than one quote, and then commit to waiting. And often, when you make a commitment to wait, by the time you get through the wait period, you decide you don't really need it anyway. But think before you buy, which is it necessary? Does it reflect my values? And will it require costly upkeep? Sometimes, for example, buying a new car, you don't think that your insurance is going to go way up too. Maybe not the same gas mileage, but think of the upkeep cost too. Discontinue buying on credit. Avoid leverage or borrowing. Practice saving and establish a tithe. So that's not much different than what I will be teaching today too. So we talked about the 4 H's of financial health. And actually, I'm going to put, if I can do this, I'm going to put a link to this in the chat. Where is my chat? So that you can go to that link and actually get a copy of this 4 H's of financial wisdom. But we start with the heart. Behavior follows belief. Do I believe I'm faithful? Do I believe that I'm a steward and not an owner? Am I content? Am I making decisions based on my faith? And do my decisions reflect the wisdom of God's word? And our behavior leads to our health. The 5 uses of money: live, give, owe, and grow. And do my spendings reflect my priorities, which lead to habits of spend less than you earn, avoid the use of debt, give generously, set long-term goals, and plan for it to have margin. And then finally, following that creates hope. By following the first 3 H's, you find and hope in our margin leader. Also in that link that I just sent, there's a way to kind of test or grade yourself, if you will. So the link is actually a 2-page document, and this is the second page where you can kind of rate where you are and maybe even fill in some numbers on your health. So it's a lot of what I'm doing will revolve around this. And at the end, I'll share a book that this is all from the Ron Blue Institute, but a lot of other ministries are using this tool also. And the Ron Blue Institute, Ron's son Michael wrote a book kind of going with this that will be really helpful. And I'm using a lot of material, so might be helpful. But going back to stewardship, we discussed that God owns it all. It's his money, not our money. We talked about several verses, but a few of them, the Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord and everything in it. Psalm 50, verse 9. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine and all that is in it. And then Haggai 2:8, the silver is mine, the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. So there were several others, but those were kind of three. But again, our behavior will follow our belief. So in the stewardship, do I believe as a steward of possessions, do I hold him with an open hand? Or do I feel like I've got to hold on to it because my worth is tied up in that, or am I just a steward of what God's entrusted me? Am I content with what I had? If you listen to Kristen's Family Friday, she shared about that. It was a really powerful message. Because contentment, you can't get enough to be content. You have to be content with where you are. In faith, am I seeking God's direction in my finances? Don kind of spoke to that. In wisdom, do my financial decisions align with biblical principles? If what I'm sharing, and again, back to week 1, what I really hope to do is encourage you to do your own study and decide what you think is biblical wisdom in relation to finances. And so then if you believe God's word is wisdom, are you aligning your financial decisions? I think it's easy a lot of times for people to separate, your finances from biblical wisdom. I'm a CPA, so I prepare lots of people's taxes, and some people, how they file their taxes line up perfectly with their values, and quite frankly, some people don't. They've been able to separate that from their faith, and you shouldn't. That's part of what you do with your finances should align with biblical principles. But first step is determine what you believe the biblical principles are. So, and again, review biblical stewardship is the use of God-given resources, which are time, talent, influence, treasure, and relationships for the accomplishment of God-given goals and objectives. So that's what we're aiming for. The 5 biblical principles: spend less than you earn. Been said that the easy secret to financial freedom is spend less than you earn and do it for a long time. And that's where you find financial success. But spending less than you earn is truly a biblical principle. And there's a lot of passages about presuming on the future. And when you're spending more than you're making, you're presuming that later you may be making more. Give generously, because giving does break the power of money in our lives. And the ability to not serve 2 masters, but to pick a master and serve God instead of money. Avoid debt because it mortgages the future. Plan for financial margin, emergency fund. If you're a Dave Ramsey fan, that's step 1, baby step, is to have $1,000 emergency fund. That's building financial margin. And set long-term goals, because there's always a trade-off between short-term and long-term. And the longer term the perspective, the better the decision. So now shifting over to our part in 1 Corinthians 4:2, it says, moreover, it is required in stewards, if we believe that we are stewards, that a man be found faithful. I thought about, just talking about the parable of the talents and a lot of us are familiar with that. But I'm just going to read it, if you'll bear with me, because I think it really is an important concept in this idea of being a steward. So it's in Matthew chapter 25, verse 14 through 29. So it says, I'm reading from the NIV, and as I read it, you maybe say, why is it called the parable of the talents? But if you, like some of us grew up with the King James, you know that used to be talents. Now it's, well, actually, I'm reading from the New King James, but if you're reading from your own Bible, it's not going to say talents, it's going to say bags of gold. But for the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who's called his own servants to deliver his goods to them. To one of them, he gave 5 talents, another he gave 2, and another 1, each according to their own ability, and immediately went out on a journey. Then he had received the 5 talents, went and traded them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise, the one who had 2 talents gained 2 more also. But the one who had 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came back and settled the accounts with them. So the one that had received 5 talents came back and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents beside them. The Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things, so I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And the same thing with the one with 2 talents. Same response, same applaud from the servant. Then he who had 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you had not sown and gathering where you had not scattered seed. And I was afraid. And I went and hid your talent in the ground. Lord, there you have what is yours. But the Lord answered him and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant. You knew that I reaped where I had not sown and gathered where I had not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with a banker. And at my coming, I would have at least received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has more, it will be given to him, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. So as we apply that into the concept of what we're talking about today as being a faithful steward, because obviously they were stewards, they were literal stewards. To recognize in our situation that God owns it all first, and we're stewards. But the amount is not important. To be a faithful steward, it doesn't matter whether we have 10 talents or 5 talents or 1 talent or a bag of gold or whatever your measuring stick is. It doesn't matter. The one with 5 got the same reward as the one with 10. So the amount is not important. It's just being faithful with what God's entrusted to you. And then faith requires action. So if we're going to put faith into our financial equation, it requires some action and trust. And likely we're being prepared for something better. So they doubled their bag of gold or talent, and then they received a greater reward. So as we shift from this to faith, and they're connected. Look at Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And that's exactly what happened in the parable of the talents. They acted on their faith, and they were rewarded. So according to Hebrews, we must believe 2 things. 1, that God exists, and 2, that he rewards those who seek him. And so, if you look to the 3 servants, that's exactly what they did. How they believed converted to how they acted and what their actions were and what they did. So they believed, the first 2, that they could trust. They didn't have to be afraid. They could trust that they were entrusted to that, and they did Their faith allowed them to take action, and they were faithful and they were rewarded. And the third one responded out of fear and not faith, and was condemned. So back to our diagram, behavior follows belief. So it's important that we have faith, but that we believe our faith makes a difference, and then we can act on that faith. So another interesting story that I won't go through, but I would encourage you to take some time to read in 2 Kings chapter 4, the parable of the widow and the oil, where, if you recall, a widow's deceased husband had died with debt, and the creditors were coming after her, were going to take her sons. So she went to Elijah the prophet, the man of God, having faith that he could do something about it. And he told her to do some things that didn't really make too much sense. But because of her faith, she went and did it, and God provided. So again, she believed, she acted on her faith, and God responded. So that's a really encouraging story. So this is from the book I was talking about by Michael Blue. Faith in our finances means seeking God's direction, and then ordering our spending, saving, giving in accordance with the convictions God has given us. So not only that's the taking action, is prioritizing and ordering according to the convictions that we've got through our personal study and our time with God. We'll get to spending some time talking about goals, and I think that's a really important part about goals, is seeking God's direction. So now we talk about spending priorities, back to our 5 uses of money. We can live, we can give, we can save, and we can pay taxes or debt. It's really kind of everything falls into one of those categories. And of course, living is a big catch-all, but this really comes down to those when we're talking about spending priorities. And again, spend less than you earn is the secret. So as we talk about prioritizing and deciding what we're going to spend, how we're going to spend, it's important to understand, or even, it's obvious, but really to kind of process the thought that there are no independent financial decisions. Whatever you spend in the living bucket is now not available to do in any other bucket. And that's, again, one of the reasons that debt, mortgage, is your future, because if you have to commit to paying back debt, then you can't use that money in the future to live, give, or grow. So there are no independent financial decisions. This doesn't mean doing one is necessarily bad, but just understand the consequences of putting it in one bucket means it can't go in any other bucket. And one of the key principles was set long-term goals. The longer term the perspective, the better the decision. So as you're making financial decisions, the longer term the perspective, the more likely you're going to be making wise biblical decisions. And financial maturity is being able to give up today's desires for tomorrow's benefits. So shifting from living to giving or growing is financial maturity. So, that's not a difficult concept, but to put it into place and actually put it on paper and to live it out is sometimes difficult. So I wanted to kind of walk through the process. So if you just say, hey, I'm going to stop spending so much, you may accomplish your goal, but it really isn't the best place to start. And to back up and really think about where you are and where you want to go is really the best way to get to the controlling spending. So we're going to talk about spending priorities and controlling spending, but that's the 4th step. The first step is to figure out where you currently are. You might call that a financial physical, but summarize where you are now. And that would entail, not only looking at where you're spending, but what you own. So there's add up everything you own, your savings account, checking account, cars, house, whatever you own, and then all the money that you owe. If you're an accountant, that's your balance sheet or net worth statement, and hopefully the things you own are greater than the amount you owe. But that's, if it's not, that's fine. That means now that helps you crystallize your goals, because that's something you need to work on probably. But the first step is to summarize where you are. One, kind of figure out your net worth, and then two, how are you currently spending your money? And that really isn't the budgeting process. That's just, what are you doing? What's your income? What are you paying in taxes? What are you giving? What are you spending? And just summarize where the inflow and the outflow, and you may want to categorize it in those 5 buckets. But that's just step one. And then now you know where you are, you can figure out where you want to go. So that's going to tell you might find that you're in really bad shape and you need to get out of debt. Or you might find, hey, I'm in pretty good shape. So maybe your goal is to give more, or to save more, or to buy, more investments. But without knowing where you are, it's difficult to establish your financial goals. So then you establish, what you need to accomplish. And then step 3 is assuming you can't meet your goals with your current cash flow margin, to work towards increasing your cash flow margin. Your cash flow margin being your income less is really the growing, is your cash flow margin, what you're saving, what you're not giving, spending on taxes, debt, or living, is your cash flow margin. So then these are all really 3 important steps, but really the hardest step is then to control your cash flow. We're probably not going to talk a lot about that, but I know that's really challenging. I'm an accountant, Minnie's an accountant, and we've struggled with that. So that's the biggest thing. But then you start the process all over. It's not a one-time thing. It's a circular process that you will do over and over. To accomplish your financial goals and to find financial freedom. And this applies no matter where you are. The principles that whether you're in dire financial straits or you're doing really well, this is what works. And this is what we should all be doing to be faithful stewards. So, I talked about presuming on the future when spending less than you earn. I recall back many years ago when I first started working, my first real job, that I was spending pretty much everything. I don't think I had a lot of debt. I had a car loan, and eventually I had a mortgage, but I was pretty much spending everything with the idea that I know, I've got a good job and my job is going to pay more and more and more. And it did. I've been in the same industry for 35 years now, and my income has gone up every year. But no matter how much money you have, no matter how much more you can earn, there will always be unlimited ways to allocate limited resources. Every time I got a raise, there were things I wanted to spend it on. So if you need to work, that's a really bad way to think about creating a plan that I'll make more later. Because if you can't live within your means where you are, you're not going to be able to live within your means when you make more. Financial maturity is being able to give up what's today for tomorrow's future benefit. And no one can serve 2 masters. He will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money. So as you're thinking about the plan and the end goal, your values and your goals all line up with the idea that you are a steward and that you're serving God and not your stuff and what you're able to accumulate. So here's the kind of how to think about that maybe. Here's your 5 buckets, if you will: giving, lifestyle, debt repayment, taxes, and cash flow margin or savings. So as you do that and you think about your money going into one of these 5 buckets, as you save and it either earns interest or grows in your investments, your net worth grows. And as your net worth grows, that allows you to look towards long-term goals. So if you're just thinking the short term, and your growth in net worth may not be all that important. You just need to take care of, what's in front of you. But as you think about long-term goals, whether that's eventual financial independence and being able to retire, meet family needs of college education or special needs, or being able to give more, or lifestyle needs, maybe you want to buy a home or a second home, or need a new car or pay off debt. But you can only accomplish these long-term goals when you have cash flow margin. So cash flow margin, or what's left over after you give to the four other buckets, that's what provides freedom and opportunity. So you want to control those other four so you can have the cash flow margin to reach your long-term goals. But it's going to be difficult to focus on your long-term goals if you don't know what they are. So that's why setting long-term goals is such an important piece of the 5 principles. I didn't say this, but if anybody has questions, please jump in. It's a little awkward talking when you can't see people. So please would welcome any questions or comments at any time. So as we think about spending, I'm not looking at anybody because I can't see you, so I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but this is what happens very often. I see this happen all the time, and primarily it's not because this is the plan. It's not the world's plan, but it's a worldly result of not planning. So you have your income. The first thing we do is determine our lifestyle. Where do we want to live? What kind of cars do we want to drive? Do we want to join a country club? Where our kids go to school? All these things we decide first, and without regard to the other 4 or 5, the other 4 buckets. So first we decide our lifestyle. And particularly in buying a home, when you go to a mortgage lender, they're going to tell you the maximum amount you can get, and that's going to be the first thing you do. But they're not planning on you being generous or giving or even saving. So you have to think through that, not what you qualify for, but what you really can afford. And so that's the first mistake, is they set lifestyle first. Then they have to pay taxes. And maybe you could argue that taxes are first if you're an employee and they come out of your paycheck. But that comes next. And then hopefully you if you have debt, you've got some left over to pay debts. But what often happens is that creates a cash flow deficit before you even get to giving and saving. So this happens routinely, and it happens because people aren't paying attention, because they're setting their lifestyle, what they think they can afford, maybe based on what they see their friends doing and what they should be able to afford. And they're setting their lifestyle without thinking all the way down their priority list. So what happens when you have a cash flow deficit? You get more debt, and the cycle continues, and it gets worse. And often this isn't realized until it's much, much too late. So even if you feel like you're doing okay, it's really important to go through this process to kind of see where you are. And again, to hopefully set some godly long-term financial goals. So here's what I would suggest as a more biblical approach, is first start with giving. I shared in week 1 that the first real lesson on stewardship that I remember was by Martin Pyle at Maynard Church of Christ in Jacksonville. And that was the first time I had heard of giving the first fruits. And I forgot the Proverbs 3:9, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruit of all your crops, and to give first. And that had never really occurred to me. And I think I shared this, that as Mindy and I were dating, our first conversation was about money was giving, and she believed in tithing, and I didn't. That tithing didn't ever cross my mind. So that was the first time that really hit me, and it's just really been continually reinforced. And Unfortunately, I learned very early in our marriage to agree with biblical wisdom, which Mindy was already on board. And we've tried to do this our entire marriage. Second, pay your taxes in Romans. It says, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, because authorities are God's servants. So we have to pay our taxes. We have to pay our debt because the wicked borrow and do not repay. And then that creates, those are our fixed have tos. And if we put giving up in the have to, that helps us set better living. So now we've got spendable income, which goes back to, similar to what Brett shared last week. Give, save, and live on the rest. So now we've given now, after we've determined how much we need to save to meet our long-term goals, then we set our lifestyle. And I realize, for many people, your lifestyle is already set, but you can work towards making adjustments, which may not be easy. It may take a long time, but again, it helps you know where you are to be able to create some cash flow margin, to be able to work on the long-term goals. So, you can do that. You can set a plan. That's the easy part. The hard part, is already shared, is creating a control. If you're married, you ought to have a plan and agree on a plan. You should monitor your spending. One of the things in Crown Ministries, the class we did, is they require you to monitor everything you spend for a whole month. I mean, every penny you spend for a whole month. And it was very eye-opening. Buying a Starbucks 2 or 3 times a week doesn't seem like much until you look for a whole month and find out how many times you did that and how much money that was. But it helps to monitor and kind of know where you're going. And then focus on problem areas. I think we've tried 100 different ways, and finally the one thing that we worked was we discovered what was our most difficult area to manage, and we put most of our efforts in that. We don't need to focus so much on controlling what our phone bill is, because it's going to be what it is, especially without long distance charges. But the things that we have we make choices on, we focused on that, and that was what really kind of finally helped us. And then don't get discouraged. If you miss it, just start again the next month, and have consistent communication again. If you're married, it's not working, just change it. You're not creating an a fixed for all time rule. If it's not working, fix it. But just realize, if you take it out of one bucket, if you need to add something to one bucket, it has to come out of another bucket. So, but revise it when necessary. If you're having really trouble controlling your spending, particularly the problem areas, spend cash. It works.
I was going to comment about the don't get discouraged. I read that book, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the I think habits was that it says that highly effective people know where the track is and they keep getting back on it. So It was basically, you're going to get off. People get off, and don't get discouraged, but just keep getting back on. And so that's how you eventually get where you want to go. So I thought that was encouraging.
Yeah, it has been encouraging. We've talked about that a lot. If you know where the track is, you can go like this, but if you're still watching the track, you're going to come back. And so this is really helpful. So it's easy to have financial goals. So you can think of financial goals. Hey, I want to be able to retire. I want to buy a new car. I want to have a savings account. I want to do all these things. It's easy to have goals and identify goals, but the problem is staying focused on the ones that are most important and prioritizing. Research says that 95% of us never have written goals in our life, but of the 5% who do, 95% of them achieve their goal. And I would say that is true for us. We don't every year sit down and write down goals, but when we find a goal we want to accomplish, we write down and we make sure we're constantly communicating about it, we always meet it faster than we think is possible. So having a goal, provides direction. If I just want to not spend so much money, isn't really a good, clear goal, because that's not going to be motivating. But if you have a goal, you want to, pay off your credit card debt, then you've got something you're watching. Or you're going to pay off your student loans. That's something you can see. You can see going down, and you can really have direction and focus. And encourage you to write it down. Writing it down and sharing it with somebody even. And they provide motivation. So the idea is list your goals, consolidate and refine them, and prioritize them. And then what is it going to take, and how long is it going to take me to do it? And again, it's been our experience when we did this, we felt pretty aggressive goals to how long it would take, and we always did it faster because we were focused and we were, and then keep them visible somehow and monitor your progress. So here's a couple thoughts on goals. You must have long-term goals to keep you from being frustrated by short-term failures, because you're gonna fail. I promise you, it's gonna happen. But if you still have that long-term goal and you stay on track, it's encouraging. Obstacles are those frightful things you see when you take your eyes off the goal. So you have to have that goal visible to keep your eyes on it, to get around the obstacles. Progress has little to do with speed, but much to do with direction. And my favorite, you got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there, by the great philosopher Yogi Berra. So I really encourage you, as you think about setting goals, to spend time with God. I really believe God communicates with us. I've never had an audible voice, but I know things I know are from God, and spending time with God and journal what you're hearing. And then make the goals measurable.
I think one thing I'd love to add to that, and it's something that I've kind of come back to a number of times, is, and I forget what verse it is. I think it's one of the Proverbs that says God's blessings. Just to summarize, God's blessings don't have burdens attached and don't bring sorrow. And so that's one of the things that I've had to keep in mind as well when looking at goals and financial things that I want to accomplish, and thinking like, is this really going to be a blessing, or is it going to end up being more of a burden? And if it adds like a burden to my life, or some kind of obstacle I'm going to have to overcome later, is it really coming from God? Or is it just my like selfish desire or cultural consumerism versus a true blessing from God? So that's something that I've had to sit and reflect on as well in planning.
Well, that is my next point. Set some overriding principles. So that's what you've done. There's a principle that, if it's going to create more trouble than blessing, then we're not going to do it. You might have an overriding principle that one spouse or either spouse is not going to spend X amount of money without discussing it with the other. You're not going to borrow money to do certain things. So set some overriding principles that are guardrails to keep you from doing. And then take action. Back to James. Don't just listen. Do not be deceived, my brothers. Don't just listen to the word. Do what it says. And then don't get discouraged by your current situation. And then the first step is figure out where you are, and don't let that discourage you and mistakes you may have made in the past. And you can start fresh. And Isaiah says, this is what the Lord says, forget the former things, do not dwell in the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it? I'm making a new way, a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. So wherever you are, make a plan and start working on it. So there were no independent financial decisions. So in conclusion, just want to leave with a couple of resources here. I shared the first week, Your Money Made Simple, which is a free Kindle version on Amazon, which Russ goes through the 5 uses of money, and the chapters are even based on the 5 uses. And it's really easy read. Financial Hope by Michael Blue uses the 4 H's. It's not free, but it's not that expensive. Michael is Ron Blue's son, and it's a really easy read too. He's got study questions, and then MoneyWise is a website that has a lot of free resources. They also have a radio show. There's a blog with a lot of information. Steve Moore and Rob West are the host of that show. Steve Moore was the Larry Burkett's co-host many, many years ago, and Rob West is the president of Kingdom Advisors. Compass Finances God's Way is Howard Dayton's ministry, who used to do Crown Ministries. Again, they have a lot of free resources on their website. And then the Ron Blue Institute, which is where you can buy Financial Hope, is where I got a lot of the materials that I'm using. And many of you know that I work for Ronald Blue and Company, but Ron is left from Ron Blue and Company many, many years ago, and this is really unaffiliated with. But same principles. It's really good information. So I encourage you to check out those resources if in your personal study. So that's all I have. Any parting thoughts or questions?
Great advice.
Thank you.